Right, so we are continuing with our Livecode completion booklet, and just now we are going to be looking at our average mark, or calculating the average mark. Now we need two bits of information for the average mark, that being the total mark and the amount of pupils that we have in our array of marks. Now, the first thing we need to do is set up our two variables, one for the average mark and one for the total mark. Then we need to initialize them. So to do that, what you do is you go to the top of your program, in the global integer variables, put a comma after amount of pupils and put average mark and total mark. Okay, now once you've done that, we need to then initialize the variables. So down here, underneath, they put 0 into amount of total pupils, amount of pupils. We're doing the same thing, but put 0 into average mark, and we're going to put 0 into total mark. Okay, now we are going to be scrolling down again to our loop, and in here, so add mark to total mark, beneath that we're going to do this thing called a running total. Now, a running total is a standard algorithm you have to understand for National 5 Computing Science, and it is where you take in a number from a user and add it onto a total in a loop, so that at the end of the loop you have the total of all the numbers entered in that loop. So here we are going to, because we are using an array, we are going to put array mark and then loop. Okay, so that whatever the user has typed in and has been validated is stored in there. We're going to add that onto the total, and then we're going to put that into the total. Okay, now I've not called it total up at the top. As you can see, I've called it total mark. So down here, you need to make sure they match up. So if they don't match up, it won't work. So what that is doing is it's taking what the user's typed in on this run of the loop, and it is adding it on to our current total mark, and then storing that into the variable total mark. So every time this loop runs, it's going to take whatever the user types in and add it on to what our total mark was last time. So by the end of the program, or the end of this loop, we have got the total of all the numbers added together. Now, we want to find the average mark. Okay, so down outside the loop, because we're not going to calculate the average every time it loops, we're going to calculate the average at the end of the loop. So underneath the comment of calculate average mark, we are going to put the total mark, and to calculate an average, you take your total and divide it by the amount of numbers you had. So in this case, the amount of pupils that you have. So we're going to be doing total mark divided by amount of pupils, because that is how many pupils were in, or how many loops our program ran. So to work at the average, and we're going to put that into the average mark. Okay, and if we apply that, our program will now ask the user to enter the amount of pupils. It will find out the total marks for all those pupils added together, and then it will calculate the average. Now down here, we've calculated the average, but we have to display it. Okay, so we're going to put in a wee sentence to go with it. So the average mark is, I'm going to put a wee colon in there and put double ampersand, average mark, and then we're going to return after field output. Now what that's going to do is display our average mark with a sentence on our display after we've displayed all of the pupils' marks. Okay.